Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's friendship behind bars when I put Franklin J. Schaffner's Papillon against Frank Darabont's The Shawshank Redemption. And man, this one was a really fun. I don't know if fun is the word for it, but definitely interesting is one, and definitely a hard one to do because both of these movies are actually really good. So let's just get down to the nit and the picky in this one. First up, we have Franklin J. Schaffner's Papillon, starring two iconic stars of the time, Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman. And I do feel honestly like they are kind of miscast in this, but they're both very handy capable actors that can definitely work with the material that they're given, especially Dustin Hoffman, who is one of the greatest actors of all time. He's just not always in the best movies, or either he's so good in them he can make mid movies seem a lot better than they are. And of course, Steve McQueen, no, very famous for breaking out of shitty prison camps, most notably The Great Escape, when he takes that motorcycle over the hill. But this is far from the grandeur. Well, at least in scale, it's on a level of grandeur of The Great Escape, but it's definitely doesn't have that sort of optimism and stuff. This is a very harsh picture. It takes place at a penal colony in French New Guinea, and it's very like it definitely doesn't shy away from the harsh realities. That some of the makeup effects in it though do seem a little over the top, and definitely don't really. It doesn't make it feel as real as it should and stuff. But honestly, and of course, Steve McQueen plays the title character, Papillon, and his whole like goal is to get the fuck out of there, even though there is no hope for escape at all. And of course, Dustin Hoffman is playing the guy named Dega, who he's been thrown in there for like ripping people off with some bonds and stocks, some kind of financial bullshit like that. And so like he's clearly got money tucked away, so Papillon befriends him, and basically kind of is his protection type thing. And they definitely go through the ringer. They have there's escape attempt after escape attempt, and what the first time it lands him in solitary confinement, and those solitary confinement scenes are some of the harshest that I've ever seen. And you really just see a man's descent into madness, just being in a fucking hole. And then that second go around, that second escape attempt is pretty badass. He damn near goes all the way. He gets away after they get ambushed in Honduras, and that scene in that leper colony, honestly, to me, the best performance in the film is Anthony Zerbe is that leper in the leper colony. And when they had that scene with the cigar, it's like, how did you know I had dry leprosy? It wasn't contagious. It's like, I didn't. That's just how cool Steve McQueen is, or was. Like his whole style, like, he'd take the cigar, he's trying to get the fuck on out of here by any means necessary. He's getting out of that prison, and ends up in Honduras or where some place where there's this like topless native girls and stuff, and he's banging those broads and stuff, and then ends up getting sold out by some nuns, and then winds up back there. And then he does finally get away. We see him riding, it seems impossible, but he finally makes it out of there. And a voiceover that we haven't heard like the whole movie comes up as a Papillon made it. He got all the way, and he lived out his days as a free man. And the penal colony did not survive him, and all. And then it just ends with shots of the penal colony. But Franklin J. Schaffner, definitely a director who can and make a film of this scale. I mean, he was coming off of Patton when he did this film, so definitely keep with. And then before Patton, it was Planet of the Apes. So he's definitely not one to shy away from the grandeur of a picture, but he just doesn't have a lot of heart. Like the film itself, it looks good, and there's a lot of great moments in it, but the pacing itself is pretty lame, or pretty, not lame would not be the word for it, but more it's just real slow and almost nap inducing, which brings us to Frank Darabont's The Shawshank Redemption, which is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel, and it stars Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, who, may not, I haven't read the source material, so I don't know how like badly miscast they were, but they embody these parts in a way that I don't think anybody else could. Of course, Morgan Freeman is also the narrator of the film. And of course, voiceover is trash, but if you're gonna have voiceover in your film, it really needs to be from somebody compelling, somebody you actually want to listen to. And Morgan Freeman is one of those people that you want to do your voiceover for. He plays the character of Red. He's the guy that can find you anything, and he plays it. He's basically the voice of reason in the film, and for some, and for a lot of other times where he's basically explained the plot in the movie, this one it honestly kind of moves it forward. For a movie that's 2.5 hours, it's pretty tight. There's no dead space. It moves at a very brisk speed. And of course, it follows around Andy Dufresne, which is played by Tim Robbins, who's a big hotshot lawyer or banker. He's a big rich banker and stuff. And he gets accused of killing his wife and the golf pro that she's fucking. And and so he's claims of innocence, but he still ends up in Shawshank, and thus it goes. He spends 20 years in there and finally finds the guy that actually did it. But then he's been doing fucking shady deals for the warden. So then now he knows all this shit. They ain't about to let him go. He's handling all the money. They got money rolling in like nobody's business and stuff. And so, that right there is just the most brilliant thing, because like you don't know that is one of the best reveals ever in a movie, because we're a movie that was already great, it's moving along, because it's also one of the greatest movies about friendship. We really see, we're in the sense of Papillon, where it's more, these guys are kind of tragedy bonding in a way, where in the Shawshank Redemption, you see like a true friendship blossom, like a mutual respect for people in a fucking shitty place and stuff. And, you definitely see that between Red and Andy in the film. And of course, the warden, played by Bob Gunton, that dude was always good at playing a prick. And this might be the pinnacle of every like prick role that he ever played. And of course, Clancy Brown as the fucking asshole guard, he's brilliant. Everybody in this film is brilliant. It's got a bevy of great character actors like William Sadler, and of course James Whitmore as Brooks, very heartbreaking. David Proval too. It's just the movie itself is one that you can just watch over and over again. There's a reason why this plays on a loop on TNT. You come into it at any time, and especially if you've seen it before, and it just works. And like I said, one of the greatest escapes that I've ever seen in a prison film. And that reveal, where they really think they got him beat down. Fuck no, hope is a beautiful thing. And he fucking, has, and honestly, the lines that they get Morgan Freeman to speak in this movie, had they been uttered by anybody other than Morgan Freeman, would have sounded dumb as shit and laughable in a Forrest Gump kind of way. It was like Andy Dufresne, the man who went through a river of shit and came out clean on the other side. Shit like that. But like I said, when you got Morgan Freeman as your narrator, you can get away with a lot of shit. He really adds a touch of class to the film. And, it's just very expertly directed by Frank Darabont. He was always best when he was adapting Stephen King novels and stuff. And, like I said, perfect fucking... It really is a perfect movie. That's why this round has to go to The Shawshank Redemption. For anybody keeping score, that's 45-40. 70s are only up by 5 now, but that lead is closing in, man. The 90s are catching up, because like I said, much like 7, The Shawshank Redemption has one of the greatest endings of all time. Just the fact that he got one over on all these motherfuckers, especially that asshole warden, thinks he's hot shit, righteous cocksucker, and ends up blowing his brains out because, Yaz is uncaught, runs away with all that money because, it's like he said, he paid for like the sins that he committed, but he didn't kill his wife, but he basically put his wife in the situation for the how she got killed type thing, so he paid, 19 years of penance, and then he's on his way on the beach in Mexico cleaning that boat and get to kick it with his homie, So, it's a beautiful film, and also it's still just as harsh, like when they beat the fuck out of that fat boy in the beginning of the film and end up killing him, and then the shit with the bull queers, Mark Ralston, he's decidedly fucking like the sinister, just just insane. You know, it's like, it's easy to be naive, in a movie that's all about hope, but that movie is a lot harsher than it lets on. But in a way like that less is more type thing. You don't need to see everything. Just let Morgan Freeman tell you what the fuck's going on, and he'll guide you through the narrative and shit. Usually that would be like a point off, but like I said, it's done. The movie is so well put together. This is what like movies are supposed to be. You're supposed to feel, it'll put you on every single emotion that you can possibly think of. You'd be laughing, you'd be crying, you're rooting for the hero. It's all right to root for the hero sometimes. And even where they both get away, it's like Papillon just kind of falls flat. I think maybe it needed a better director, or it needed better actors that were suited for the material. Like Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman could do their thing, but sometimes they just didn't have the material that they needed to have, type thing. And it just feels like the Shawshank Redemption, everything fell into place right. So one of the few perfect movies. So for anybody keeping score, 45-40, 70s are up by 5, but man, the 90s are coming back with it. Who knows? And if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. Like I said, all this stuff's up for debate, this open forum. I'm just doing a little rough draft to a doctoral thesis, because I got to know which decade's better for filmmaking, the 70s or the 90s. Seems like they're both great, but there's got to be a winner somehow.